Yeah, that's like an entirely different rabbit hole. But we'll start with the reading session. As always, always feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions, and share your thoughts as well. I'll start with wokeism. And very interestingly, Dhruvil, I think you might like this session, and please ask very basic questions because this is a pretty politically dense subject and it's a very new thing. So it's not even something that I had heard of in my early 20s. And I only heard of it since the time I've been on social media, and it's a very weird new phenomena which nobody likes. Everybody in Bitcoin understands there is a problem with it, but there's a process of articulating that. I think you also understand it, right? That's why you were interested in Bitcoin. That's why you are going through this journey of understanding it better. So yeah, I'll start now. Wokeism. In the cloak and dagger world of Cold War espionage, one man's crisis of conscience proved more potent than the propaganda machine he once served. So, yeah, this is itself a concept of Cold War espionage that I think if you're a Hollywood fan, you might have heard of it. If you are a historian, you might have heard of it. Most people don't think of it, and it's literally one man's story of conscience that was more important to him than any other propaganda that was trying to distract him. Yuri Bezmenov, born in 1939 in Soviet Moscow suburb of Mytishchi, has been trained as a master of deception by the notorious KGB. After cutting his teeth spreading disinformation with the press arm of Soviet army, Bezmenov went to work for the Novosti press agency in 1963, all while moonlighting as an informant for the KGB itself. But after over a decade of disseminating lies on an industrial scale, Bezmenov made the ultimate defection, abandoning the rotten core of the Soviet system he could no longer tolerate. His daring escape to the West in 1970 put his life in the crosshairs, leading him to assume a new identity as Thomas David Schumann in Canada. Yet this was only the beginning of the high stakes journey for the disillusioned agent, determined to expose the sinister machinery of subversion where he had once thrived. So, like I said before, it's the story of one man and his conscience making a decision. It's nothing to do with anything external that was going on. In the West, Bezmenov became known for his lectures and interviews about his KGB experiences, in which he warned about Soviet espionage tactics. He focused on the concept of ideological subversion, a process he described as a slow method of brainwashing or psychological warfare aimed at changing the perception and behavior of entire societies. So, if you're into Bitcoin, you already understand at a very intuitive level that there are forces which are changing the perception and behavior of entire society. It's not just individuals anymore because every Bitcoiner met each other and shared the same story of not being able to find other Bitcoiners and they having to put in active effort to find them, putting in work because we find ourselves in a situation where people around us have a very different perception of the world. He emphasized He emphasized that this subversion was more dangerous than conventional espionage because it sought to destabilize and demoralize nations from within. The popular image of intelligence work fueled by Hollywood and mainstream media distorts the reality of Cold War tactics. According to Bezmenov, the KGB dedicated only about a sixth of its budget to actual espionage. The bulk, a staggering 85%, was spent on a more insidious objective, catalyzing a gradual ideological shift in the West. Rather than target abrupt overnight impact, the KGB's influence operation was meticulously crafted to work gradually and persistently, steadily reshaping mindsets and beliefs. So yes, so that's a very dark subject and also a very basic concept of just allowing someone else control over your behavior and how KGB was able to do that very successfully. And it's because we get into the nitty gritties here, but we'll not cover any specific detail. That's not the lesson here. The lesson is that they were low time preference and they were clearly geniuses, but they chose to use that to harm other people. And yeah, this was the reason that Bezmenov was working for them because they clearly laid out a plan and Bezmenov was part of that mission. But Bezmenov never quite was able to fully be okay with it. Bezmenov divides the process of Soviet style ideological subversion into four stages. So he divides this process that they laid out in four stages. Demoralization, the initial and most protracted phase, spanning up to 20 years, involves gradually undermining a nation's values and beliefs. The goal is to alter the perceptions of an entire generation. In the context of the United States, this meant exposure to Marxist-Leninist ideology, subtly injected into the education system and cultural discourse, as happened during the Cold War. I'll take a brief pause here. I think I've been talking for the last 7 minutes and it's a pretty dense subject. So if we want to also just ask questions, very basic questions, please feel free, and just sharing anything fun or interesting is also not a problem.
There was an article that I was reading today, and it was on something like similar, like left subversion, and it was basically giving example of technologies like Wikipedia, which was like to begin with a like libertarian project, but like increasingly has left leaning biases in it, and yeah, so one of the things that I was thinking, like in general, like Bitcoin against a libertarian project, uh, but uh, but like any set of people or a group who has more motivation, or who is more driven to change the nature of a project towards a certain ideology, is it always the case that the project do get molded in that direction, or is it just some cherry picked example that the authors were mentioning, for example Wikipedia? uh, does the group has any suggestion or any lens through which they look at this thing, that a lot of libertarian projects uh, could have turned towards left leaning, because like left leaning folks as a group have more motivation?
So yeah, as it is pretty dense, I'll just share my one thought quickly and then I'll open this discussion. That I think for some reason it's easier to fall into the group ideology. It's a very human temptation, but I think once you understand the value of sovereignty, you can never look back, because that's who you are. That makes you who you are. And if somebody is falling victim to that noise, then it's on them after a point in life. I'm not sure if I have the number. It could take multiple lifetimes, could take decades or years, or maybe some people never do that. I think I mean, everybody always realizes it eventually, but I'm nobody to say that I have any mastery over that. And in short term, at least, I mean, in 10 years, 20, 30, maybe 40, you will realize the value of low time preference, is what I think.
Interesting. Any other thoughts from other folks?
None from my end. I was I'm more of a listener and trying to understand these concepts from people who have pondered over them earlier. But yeah, nothing to share. Just absorbing what the two of you said.
Yeah, yeah. Also, just one quick point. I think libertarian ideas are also assuming game theory and ideology, but Bitcoin is different because it also realizes the need for change of value transfer system. What I mean by that is that it's not just a technical thing, because currently the mining pools, for example, that are controlling majority of the hash rate are not doing that because they are hacking Bitcoin on a technical level. They are doing that because they have the ability to create a short-term incentive which is harmful in the long term. And I was watching an interview of Bitcoin mechanic, and I'm just one interview deep into this, so I don't know enough to make a technical comment. But I know that it requires much more mobilization than a lot of people think, which Ocean and I think few other protocols might also be part of it. But I know Ocean is the leader in it. But yeah, I'll continue reading. This is again, as I said, pretty dense. We'll also try to keep it light in case somebody has anything light to share. Always feel free to do that. Destabilization, rather than altering belief, this stage focuses on destabilizing the targeted nation's economy, foreign relations, and defense systems, or disruption to the fundamental structures that keep a society functioning properly. So after demoralization, which is 20 years, you have destabilization, which is a rather short-term thing, and it has mainly three things that he describes: nation's economy, foreign relations, and defense systems. Yeah, if you're into science fiction, you know that those are part of most movies, but it's also a reality for the US government, at least, if not Indian government. Crisis, a potentially rapid phase, often as brief as 6 weeks, is marked by significant upheaval of unrest, ultimately leading to radical changes in the targeted nation's power structure and economy. Normalization, the ultimate objective. This stage cynically rebrands the subversive elements, consolidation of power, as the new normal. ushering in a new status quo. I'll just share one opinion. I think I'll just sum it up quickly that it's a process that Soviets have come up with for ideological subversion, and it's four stages: demoralizations, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. And the modern day example of it is the woke culture of the US, because that society is clearly more inclined to value socialism and uh, obscure, unimportant ideologies. And because of that, that entire system is not functioning anymore. And that's true for every fiat system, but I think this has just grown significantly large and is the dominant value transfer. And the solution to that is not other fiat, and the solution to that is Bitcoiners. The first, demoralization, is particularly significant. Its effects are long lasting and in many cases irreversible. It renders a population unable to discern factual information or to make rational decisions in their best interests. The indoctrination infiltrates so profoundly that even in the presence of overwhelming evidence against their beliefs, the demoralized individuals refuse to acknowledge obvious truths about their reality. Does this sound familiar, dear reader? Yeah. If you just looked at the world and felt that there is a clown world, then you know that yeah, this is a common phenomena that we experience. Bezmenov warned that the process of demoralization in the United States had not only been completed but even exceeded expectations. Even if efforts to reverse the trend were initiated, it would take another 15 to 20 years to undo the damage. Although Bezmenov's message is from the 80s, ideological subversion is still a clear and present danger. Today, with success assured, it operates not in the shadows but in plain sight, manipulating perceptions and altering the fabric of society. I disagree with the last sentence, that to say that its success assured, because I think uh, Bezmenov gave lectures in 90s, and even though he's currently right that we can see wokeism in its full power in 2024, but he is wrong because we have a solution now, which is Bitcoin, and which was not libertarian thinking, because Bitcoin not works does not just work because it has an ideology behind it. There's also a longer time preference horizon involved, which I think Ocean also is researching on how the short term solution for creating stronger incentive for somebody to guide or direct their hashing power to the larger pools is actually not good for, even for them in the longer term, because it's like a shot of heroin, and it just makes you an addict instead of realizing that longer term you want to reward efficiency and not um, a shorter term guarantee of salaries. Even though the outward facing KGB disappeared alongside the rest of the Soviet Union in the early 90s, the propagandist modus operandi of these charming organizations seems almost embedded in the DNA of all collectivist ideologues. The KGB was not the first, nor will be the last collectivist institution to harness the power of indoctrination. This is the point, that it's not just West, it's not just wokeism, that this thing is not the first time in history and certainly not the last. In a similar fashion to how pedophiles are drawn to careers involving childcare, collectivists can be found all over mass media outlets and universities when polls about political affiliations are conducted among journalists. The results tilt overwhelmingly to the left. The same is true for academia. These fields often self-select for people who believe societal problems can and ought to be solved by rallying the masses to advance specific causes. Social engineering ideology speaks to the inherent narcissism of the highly educated intellectual. That wasn't real communism, but I know how to do it the right way. I think, like I said before, communism has happened before, and every time there was a group of people trying to tell other people how to live. Looking at essential human personality traits, it's easy to see why shifts toward collectivization have happened frequently throughout history. Collectivists tend to be more agreeable than individualists, which is unsurprising given the category labels. Agreeable is the why can't we all just get along personality trait. If you regard group agreement as inherently valuable, you're more likely to sacrifice other things to achieve it. If honesty is to be sacrificed, agreement must come at the truth's expense. Yeah, so this is deep philosophy, and I think somebody else has also joined us. Hi, Rabli Sumo. Thanks for joining. We are already very deep into the book, and it's a very dense subject. So I'll just recommend that if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. I won't be able to give a summary though. I can just say that we are discussing the second chapter, which is wokeism, which is a collectivist ideologue that has taken over the US, but it's also has its effects everywhere, of course, in India as well. And yeah, but at the intersection of psychology, game theory, and Bitcoin, of course, that Bitcoin is the only solution to a collectivist ideologue, because it's the first time that we can verify the rules of the game that we are playing, that is Bitcoin. It's not just a game. I think that's like the primary lesson from game theory, that game theory is a mathematical framework. It's not a game. The belief that the world is divided strictly between the mega rich and super poor is misconception. Most people fall into a middle class, middle income category, but mainstream media and politicians trying to win votes from people's emotional responses reinforce the skewed perception of global poverty. Countless human development metrics show significant improvement over time, challenging the bleak outlook portrayed by the media. Today, when the global free market has made everything so cheap that extreme poverty is approximately just a third of what it was at the beginning of the millennium, collectivists have had to come up with a new phase of framing the class war. Yeah. So currently, so this was a talk by Professor Per Byron, who had joined us during How to Think About the Economy session, and he had said this, that uh, humanity is already far ahead in terms of what they have achieved in the last 200 years to even think of poverty or be worried about it. And so the thing is that poverty, that does not make poverty go away, but that what that tells you is that we are in times of decreasing poverty per year, even though we are living on a fiat standard. But people don't realize that it's not because of fiat that we got here. It's because of capital. It's because of property rights. It's because of technology. And property rights have been abused. That's why we have more poverty than a capitalistic system would even allow. So that's the overall rambling. But yeah, repeat some. If you have any basic questions, also please uh, feel free to ask them. What used to be a struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeois has now transformed into an orchestrated battle between certain minority groups and straight white middle-aged men. So it's not. It's no longer religion. It's no longer philosophies. It's no longer um, questions of truth and justice. It's no longer about mathematics. It's about certain minority groups and white men for some reason. The multivarious Marxist infiltration of academia and mass media is easy to spot. Vogue ideology is everywhere when actual Marxist infiltration tactics mix with the tendency of the media and academia to attract self-righteous collectivists, everything falls apart. The more the blue-haired, non-cisgendered revolutionaries climb the institutional ladders, the more dysfunctional these institutions become. Wokeism abounds in social and political activism, especially around just social justice, race, gender, and environmentalism, which is why you hear so much about these superficial topics and so little about actual problems. Yes. Like I said before, this session is dense, so it's not something that we can come up with answers for, because that's somebody to take his own journey through. But I think the lesson here is that as society is seeing more value poor people. I don't know. I don't know if I can articulate it, but people who have influence, who have values in the wrong place, and that's like an cause and effect thing. So it's an effect, it's not the cause. The cause is the fiat system, but the effect is what we are seeing in the world right now in terms of leadership. And that's also why it thrives on superficial topics. So Bitcoin is bad for the environment is has become more important than do we need sound money, and that's the result of this fiat system. One example of Marxist infiltration is the movement in education institutions to decolonize the curriculum. Yeah. Decolonization involves reevaluating and changing the content of courses to reduce the historical role of Western civilization in favor of an allegedly more inclusive global perspective, one that emphasizes the contributions and cultures of previously marginalized societies. While the stated intention of this initiative is to create a more balanced and inclusive educational environment, it more often than not downplays important historical events and achievements, particularly those involving white men on the winning side. Funnily enough, or perhaps strategically, the role of the money printer in shaping society hardly ever makes it into the curriculum, decolonized or otherwise. Yeah, I think this is a very US centric view, so I'll just focus on the last line here, that no history book covers the role of the money printer, and whether your curriculum is ICSC, CBSC, international, you will never have even studied the concept of central banking, let alone the problem with it in school. Moreover, governments and institutions in some Western countries have introduced policies to use gender neutral language in official documents and communications, for example, to be more inclusive of non binary and transgender individuals. Certain jurisdictions have adopted the use of they them pronouns or gender neutral titles like MX. Some countries have outright criminalized the act of misgendering people. That's just hilarious. That's not even a serious thing, I guess. But yeah. Hey Bala, thanks for joining. Okay, I'll take a pause here. We're about halfway into the session. Unless I've made you guys sleepy. Uh, yeah.
I just realized yesterday that GitHub, I don't know if this has happened recently or it's been there for some time. GitHub now asks you for your pronouns. It's optional, but they ask you for your pronouns.
Oh shit. Yes, Setu has messaged. Be back in a bit, poor network. Yes, no worries. Okay. And the thing with, yeah, I think it's very weird that it's got to the internet as well because GitHub is the repository of most open source software as well. So it's not even a Bitcoin friendly
Also,
platform.
yeah, a company like Microsoft, like today or tomorrow, they are bound to enter the artificial intelligence business, right? They're not going to sit with folded hands when other companies are leveraging this AI boom. So tomorrow,
Right.
they are also going to come up with something like a Chat GPT. In fact, they have already an AI tool, which is GitHub Copilot, but that's specifically for coding. But tomorrow, they might come up with something like a Chat GPT or a Grok that Twitter has, and you can expect what kind of answers and what kind of information that AI tool is going to render when the people behind it have a certain ideology.
True.
ChatGPT OpenAI is already backed by Microsoft, yeah? I thought so.
Uh, no, I think it was for a period of time. They funded him for a period of time. Okay, and then I think the deal broke off. I'm not. I don't think they're with Microsoft anymore. It was there for a very short period of time. Then it broke off, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep, yep. Yeah, well, I will verify that maybe if somebody gets the time, and I'll try to share it with the rest of the group. If yeah, I think OpenAI was started by Sam Altman, but even I'm not sure if recently Microsoft has not been working with them. So we'll continue, and if somebody else also has any resources or discussions, feel free to share them with the group or discuss whenever you want to. The prevailing power analysis mindset of the woke world is a simplistic concept that has gained traction precisely because it requires minimal intellectual effort. Power analysis operates on a simple premise based solely on gut feeling. The group that seemingly deserves the most sympathy is granted priority in claiming victimhood. The Marxists of the 21st century are no longer upset about group wealth inequalities but are more concerned with which group to signal that they pity the most. So this is a common collectivist ideology principle to make people feel sympathetic towards people who are victims for some reason, and they instead of teaching them lessons like personal responsibility and wealth creation and property rights, they end up teaching them the concept of theft, which is redistribution of income, which does not make sense because income was never distributed, so it can never be redistributed because you have to create it. It can't be um, you could have created that value, and so it's a violation of property rights because you have the access to that property, and somebody stealing that is theft. Power analysis leads to skewed perspective where, for example, it's socially acceptable for women to express disdain towards men, but not the reverse. Yet women are not allowed to object to the penis haver in their dressing room. It's also only acceptable for individuals to express prejudice based on body size in a one-sided manner. No one's upset about skinny shaming. Similarly, derogatory terms aimed at immigrants are considered more offensive than those aimed at natives. I think the lesson here is, yeah, it's just that, yeah, analysis has just gone rogue or very unstable. It all leads to Operation Olympics, where you win by defending the most marginalized group you can come up with. Whether your marginalized group is throwing people off another marginalized group of rooftops doesn't matter so long as the former is perceived to be more oppressed than the latter. Where a particular group sits on the victimhood scale whimsically changes over time, but consistency is of little concern to people playing this game. So they only care about signaling. The loudest voice usually gets the attention they so desperately crave. Clown world is in full swing. Yeah. I think internet, interestingly, I find to also be very susceptible to clown world. I think that's obvious. I think most people realize that because it's so attention economy focused that it's just wanting your attention all the time. So internet, at least social media values encourage them to make those algorithms addictive. So there are solutions to it like Noster, which is in works right now, but I haven't been able to use it as much to make any comment on it. Although it's hard for most to see, fractional reserve banking is the main engine which that drives the entire circus caravan. Monetary expansion triggers the Cantillon effect, which funnels wealth from those furthest away from the money printer to those closest to it, the most politically connected. But when left to function on its own, the free market rewards productivity and efficiency while punishing laziness and inadequate risk management. The more politicized the free market process grows, the more hampered to the effects of this natural phenomena become. The not so free market with inflationary money and high taxes rewards political correctness rather than value creation. Yes, so this is the Cantillon effect is the most understandable, or at least it takes time to understand it. But I think that's if you had to summarize it, that what fiat ends up doing is funneling wealth from those who are actually producing it to a parasitic class. So that's enough incentive for somebody to at least start questioning the entire system, because you can see it, you can observe it without a doubt. Once on the slippery slope of collectivist takeover, society soon starts showing significant signs of decay. One prominent indication is how obedience becomes a virtue, regardless of whether the law being obeyed is ethically sound. During the latter stages of the horrendous lockdowns during the COVID-19 pandemic, local rules changed frequently, and knowing which guideline they jure to follow at the moment became a marker for how good of a citizen you are. Mass psychosis is a genuine phenomena, and the human race can be pretty scary whenever it occurs. History is littered with examples from Nazi Germany to Mao's China to the USSR, North Korea. They all had one thing in common: they valued the collective above the individual. Yeah, it's again in full swing right now. If somebody is just following the mainstream news, so the point is that collectivist ideologies have had very extreme examples to make it clear that they are uh, doing what any theft does, but they're doing it very slowly. So it takes time for people to see it. So this is the most powerful paragraph. One cannot escape or stop collectivism by being a collectivist oneself. Only when you come to this realization do you stand a chance of escaping the matrix and bypassing the clown world altogether. The only way to avoid the perils of collectivism is to carve your own path, to be an individualist first and foremost, and to think for yourself. I'll actually stop here because I think the next comment is by a US president, because this paragraph before that is more powerful, because Bitcoiners are in this journey of escaping the matrix, whatever that means to you. If that's just a metaphor, if that's a movie, but if it's a thing that you have thought about, you know that there is clearly lies and there are clearly truths. And for a lot of reasons, we have been taught lies. And Bitcoin is the solution to that, because Bitcoin allows you to verify the rules of this is the first money that you can verify the rules for. This is a continuous battle that never ends. As Ronald Reagan said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children that where it was once, like in the United States, where men were free. So this is a US president quote, but I don't want to give it too much attention. But yeah, I'll actually just not give it attention. Let's continue reading. Clownish political ideas have existed for as long as politics itself. They come in many ways, shapes, and forms, and it can be hard to see their ridiculousness when living among them. There are methods for directing clownishness, though. One of the most effective is first principles, rational thinking. From a first principles perspective, there can only be one logically consistent human right: the right to be left alone. Coming to first principle, I'll stick for the rest of the session to very basic definitions. And first principle means the ability to define a concept. And when you do that, the concept of right becomes important, because that's you must have heard of it at least at school. So you define a right, and yeah, the only logically consistent human right from a rational perspective is the right to be left alone. The right to be left alone is the only human right that doesn't require violating someone else's rights. It is the fundamental moral and ethical underpinning of the libertarian idea of non-aggression principle, which in turn is the foundation of absolute property rights. No country on earth currently adheres to these principles. The notion of a government and the monopoly on violence inherently contradicts the non-aggression principle. Yep. I think even if you're not a libertarian, and if there's a good chance that all of you are, but you understand property rights, because property rights, as we'll read in this book as well, are the only rights that matter. Because if somebody is being noisy, you can at least go back to the home that you belong to, and so any violation of freedom of speech is still fine if you have property rights. So that's like how did most people miss it in terms of understanding the world, but during writing the constitution, I guess. But I think most people sadly are not able to do that. I think it's a generation problem. It doesn't matter who the enforcing group is: governments, religious cohorts, drug cartels, football hooligans, mafiosos. If you're being punished for a victimless crime, you are the victim. From a strict consensualist, non-aggressive, ethical perspective, a crime always involves violating property rights. Otherwise, it's not a crime. So, just one point on anti-money laundering. I think it's the most racist thing ever because it literally says that there is black money and white money. I'm sorry, guys. I'll just take a pause.
That was a joke, right? I'm assuming that was a joke.
Yes, it's a joke. It's a joke.
Yeah, okay. I know money laundering laws are abused and exploited a lot of times. A lot of times, when even if the money is ethically acquired, the authoritarians might come up with rules that might penalize you even for acquiring it authentically. But initially, I believe these rules were prima facie intended to tackle illegal acquiring of wealth
Right.
or
Right.
something like that.
So that's
Yeah,
a
but
difficult,
they're abused.
yeah,
They're out there.
that's a difficult thing to do, and I think you're absolutely right. So capital controls applies to gold as well. So there's only a certain amount of gold you're allowed to carry outside of India. So yeah, that's the violation of property rights. And people saying that this is dirty gold because you have purchased it without registration is a racist idea. Because what do you mean that money is dirty or money is this or that? I mean, racist. What I mean by racist is neutral. That money is neutral. So you can't distinguish between two tokens of money, saying that one is like if you don't like it, don't accept it. But you can't enforce others to not use. Yeah.
Also, not just carry gold, you're not allowed to own more than 100 grams if you're a man, and more than 500 grams if you're a woman.
More than 100 grams? Seriously?
Yeah.
So if I buy a gold ring or whatever jewelry, I have to register?
No, as far as I understand, you cannot own more than 100 grams of gold. So, if you're in a family of 4 person, let's say, then if there are two ladies, then you can own 1 kg, 1.2 kg of gold, not more than that.
Even foreign currency, there's a limit. I mean, if you're traveling abroad, then it's, only then you can own foreign currency. You need a visa, you need your passport. Even if you want $100 from a forex exchange, they will not tender that $100 to you until and unless you furnish your to and fro tickets, your visa, your everything, your accommodation, all the details they want. So not only gold, even foreign currency you're not allowed to own.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the same reason why US dollar is traded at 90 rupees per dollar in the black market.
Right. Especially in countries which are in a much more inferior situation than India is. Like I have friends who live in Egypt, which is economically a very backward country, and there it's almost 2x 3x. It might be 10 rupees 12 rupees or like 10% 5 7% in India. There it's directly 2x 3x, and if you get caught with dollars, then there is going to be a very very severe punishment. So like getting caught with drugs or something is less severe there than
Yes.
getting caught with dollars.
Yes. 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 That's exactly the money laundering law. Yeah. I mean, it's if you think from it from first principles, it's not a complicated thing because that's the rule that if you're caught with foreign currency after a certain limit, then you're a money launderer. Yeah, it's like so we have freedom of laws in India. Sorry, freedom to freedom of speech in India, but we don't have property rights. That's the irony because you can complain about it, but you can't do anything about it. That's the irony of the fiat world. And yeah, Bitcoin changes that because you're not asking for freedom of speech. You're just asking for to be left alone. So you have that in India, and yeah, I think that's also why I am not too concerned about the Indian government in general. if aliens ever landed on Earth, they would find most human activities confusing to say the least. It is likely that aliens also construct homes and reproduce, but whether they baptize their kids, cheer for sports team, or organize pride festivities is questionable. If they do, they probably do peacefully without trying to enforce their hobbies onto others. If the aliens are technologically sophisticated enough for interstellar travel, they must have dropped crusades, hooliganism, and the persecution of pronoun misusers long ago. Unfounded violence is never the civilized solution to any problem. Yep. So it comes in all shapes. So football hooliganism is something that is nothing to do with any afterlife or any controversial or social idea. It's to do with two football teams which are just playing for a few decades in some tournaments, and people actually take it as a matter of life and death. So it comes in various forms, collective ideologues. So silence, contrary to popular belief, is not violence. Silencing others by force is, unless you're doing it on your property where you set the rules. This is just one of the reasons why property rights are more important than freedom of speech laws. If you don't wish to be robbed of your possessions, you have to accept that it's not morally okay for you to demand that others be robbed of theirs. Since every country on earth robs its citizens to some extent, they live and let live. This live and let live type of lifestyle is only possible through barter or Bitcoin. Barter requires a mutual coincidence of wants and has no practical usefulness in the modern world. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is an agreement on a fixed set of rules for peaceful interaction between people, not a top down system you can't opt out of. Everything in Bitcoin is voluntary, literally everything that anybody in Bitcoin does, whether they think or whether they send a transaction, they are doing it voluntarily. So it can never ever be confused with coercion or top-down structure because nobody's forcing you to participate. When money is nothing but information, confiscating it becomes much more challenging. It is impossible to know how much Bitcoin another person owns since the coins are literally in their owners' heads. In the long term, this changes everything because it reduces the profitability of violent behavior. Silent information, stealing information from someone's memory is inherently more complex than confiscating their physical possessions. Information, especially when stored in someone's head, is intangible and can only be physically seized with the individual's cooperation or using coercive techniques that still do not guarantee success. In contrast, physical possessions are tangible and much more easily confiscated. For both the taxman and the highway robber, Bitcoin poses a threat to their livelihoods. I think the key insight for me is about capital controls because everybody can criticize it. You can file an RTI and find out how much gold do they allow and how much gold do they confiscated because it's the balance sheet of the sovereign state of India. But you are not allowed to travel with your wealth. You are allowed to own as much as you can. You have to register and you have to give away your identity, but you can own gold even up to the limit. You can't travel with it. So it's like a jail that you are forced to live in. And Bitcoin poses a threat to their livelihood because it's information. So there are ways to hide information, and that's like the privacy discussion of an entire infrastructure of privacy. Whenever you are not revealing any more information than you need to, which is your personally identifiable information. When you are doing a trade with somebody, you don't need to share anything personal. And yeah, that's how privacy is respected. This is well understood between humans when they interact in the meat space, but in the information space, it's uh, it's not easy to maintain privacy because you're connected to your ISP, you're connected to your local router, and that might be shared by other devices with the entity registered, etc. Moreover, information in a person's memory is not directly accessible to others without the individual revealing it willingly. Even then, the accuracy of the retrieved information is hard to verify. If the perpetrator manages to force a Bitcoiner to give up his Bitcoin, there is no way of knowing if the stolen amount was all there was. It is possible to keep more than one secret once shared or extracted. Information can be replicated endlessly without degrading the original copy in someone's memory. None of this is true for physical possessions. This refers to the concept of uh, hidden wallets, or I think there is a technical word for it that I think Bitcoin community uses. Passphrase, I think, is the word that you use a passphrase to create a deceit wallet, and you can
Decoy wallets.
decoy wallet. Yes, thank you. That's repeat so much. Thank you. And decoy wallets allow you to store funds in one wallet and using a passphrase that's just in your mind or in some other place than your backup. You can't reveal all the information in one use of Bitcoin. So it allows you to create multiple wallets, and even if somebody steals from one, you are still relatively safer because you have other wallets that they have no information on. In contexts where coordination or conflict involves securing information rather than physical assets, the usefulness of violence diminishes due to the intrinsic differences in how information physical possessions are controlled and protected. Acquisition strategies change when the asset resides in someone's memory. Traditional leverage methods become less effective. Traditional leverage method becomes less effective. Therefore, the incentives for everyone shift towards voluntarism, offering something in return. In other words, as a result, consensual free market exchanges become more profitable than violent confiscations, even for the taxman and the highway robber. In a hyper-Bitcoinized world where information is more valuable than physical assets, reliability, loyalty, and honesty become commodities in their own right. Your reputation becomes your most valuable asset next to your Bitcoin stack. We have merely scratched the surface of how revolutionary and transformative the discovery of Bitcoin really was. I'll just continue reading. I'll not share my interpretations because I think this is something that's something that you have to just spend time with in your own times, and we'll read through this, but I'll not give my interpretations on what they mean. And if somebody has questions about them, always feel free to ask. It can be hard to see the violence inherent in every government policy, but at the end of the day, not obeying the law inevitably leads to men with guns taking your freedoms away. Extrapolate all the way to the end, and you'll realize that even not putting tampons in your men's room can lead to your losing a part of your life, liberty, and property. Every modest fine for a victimless crime is a property violation. In reality, microaggression is not what the woke mob think it is. Offending someone by using the wrong pronoun may sound aggressive, but there's no actual violence involved. Woke policies and regulations, on the other hand, are all actually aggressive since they are ultimately enforced by men with guns. A term like macroaggression is more appropriate to describe their actions. Most people are clueless about how free they could be if they viewed the world differently and used the right tools. The majority of all populations in all countries are lulled and brainwashed into believing that some people have the right to make decisions for others. The only thing making this intersubjective delusion somewhat true is the monopoly on violence that all governments possess within their borders. The battle against collective subversion cannot be won with weapons, but with the dissemination of information, cultivation of critical thinking, and an unwavering commitment to first principles thinking. I'll take a pause here. We're completed the chapter wokeism, and as I said, this is a politically very charged text. So, yep, I think it's just for some people to, for anybody to just sit in their own time and think about. I think most Bitcoiners already do that, and they have come to this conclusion that there is a collectivist ideologue fight, whatever that is. It's the idea, it's the concept, it's specific names. I don't think it's specific names. So we have about 10 minutes. What I'll do is I'll read the first page of this chapter as an introduction, and we can cover it in the next session. I'll recommend that since it's a pretty dense session, we'll just close off the session in a bit, and we can have a general chat or just an early night if in case you guys have had your dinners. If not, then do have your dinner after this. Clown World, ask anyone what the most pressing political issue in the world is today, and you'll get a wildly different answer depending on who you ask. Climate change, nuclear threats, misinformation, censorship, corporate greed, the responses will run the gamut. But drill down and you'll find a common thread underlying these problems, something most people miss entirely: the urge for there to be a free lunch. From individuals to nations, we share an innate desire to reap rewards without paying the costs. Until we shed this delusion and accept that every action has consequences, we'll remain trapped in a perpetual cycle of new crises spawning from the attempt to solve the old ones. Robert Heinleich's famous adage, "There is no such thing as a free lunch," encapsulates the fundamental economic principle that nothing is ever given away for free without a cost somewhere to someone. The phrase highlights that even if something appears to be free, costs are always involved, though they might be hidden or distributed in ways that are not immediately apparent. The concept is grounded in the understanding that resources are limited and any goods or services provided for free must still be produced and delivered. The stereotypical free lunch is that you'll have your meal paid for, but only if you agree to watch this short sales presentation or sign up for the first free week of this fantastic subscription. I'll close my screen. I'll just summarize the passage, the paragraph, and then the overall session. And yeah, we'll just take 30 minutes to 30 seconds to do that, sorry, and we'll close the discussion for the book. The clown world is the reality that we observe whenever we interact with somebody who is not open to thinking, because if you're thinking, you have a thinking mind, then you will eventually at least realize the truths. It's on you now to act on them. But I think most people sometimes, maybe I might be wrong, it depends, it's a very intersubjective thing, that they don't think or like to put in work, and that makes them susceptible to someone else doing that. So when essentially we live in a world where everybody is a monarch, everybody is a sovereign, and the system either works for you, the system does not work for you. So you can choose to be part of a different system, you can choose to be part of any game that you want to participate in, any system that you want to participate in, but some systems will serve you, some will not. So this is my rambling on this passage, and as well as the second chapter, wokeism.